Hello YouTube, it's Mr. Magz here, and today on Stupid Nintendo Articles, I'm going over an article titled, I'm Becoming Increasingly Disappointed with the Nintendo Switch. Now, this is one of those classic articles where it's written by a guy who's complaining about something, yet I don't really believe that this person was ever really in a position where they could have liked it in the first place. Like, throughout the entire article, he keeps referencing the fact that he's never been a huge Nintendo fan in the first place, yet he's still super disappointed in the Nintendo Switch. Just, he didn't really give a good argument as to why exactly this particular system he's more upset with it than other systems in the past. We'll get into that, but just that style of article I see a lot, and it's honestly kind of annoying. Like the majority of the articles I do like this, they're clearly complaining about something, yet give me no evidence that they're ever really fans in the first place. So let's get right into reading. I've always had an off and on relationship with Nintendo. I've owned many of their consoles, pretty much all of them since GameCube, in fact. So which ones haven't you owned? You say pretty much all of them since GameCube. Does that mean you didn't own the NES, SNES? That could just mean you're not, old enough. The GameCube was your first one, and that's fine. I just kind of wish you had, I don't know, explain yourself a little better there, because you say you have an off and on relationship, and you say you've owned many of their consoles, most of them since GameCube. I kind of wish you would say which ones you hadn't owned to give me a little bit more of a perspective. Because if you've grown up, since the NES or SNES days, then what you're saying here might have a little more credence. But if the GameCube was your entry point, I'm just not sure if the majority of what you're saying here really holds ground. But we'll get into all that. But they've never had as much use as those of their competitors. Okay, that's fine. You have Nintendo consoles, but you play your Xbox and or PlayStation more. I don't have a problem with that. Just let's get that out there. On GameCube, I avidly played Donkey Konga. On Game Boy Advance, I played Castlevania Circle of the Moon and Harmony of Dissonance. The Nintendo DS was where I played yet more Castlevania games, and on 3DS, I had my fill of Ridge Racer 3D. I kind of appreciate how niche a lot of these titles are. Because most people who say they avidly played GameCube, they would say, "Oh, Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, Smash Bros, etc." But you went with Donkey Konga, which was interesting. Same thing with Game Boy and DS. Most people would jump to Pokemon, etc. Yet you are clearly more of a Castlevania fan. And 3DS, Fire Emblem, again, Smash Bros, any of the Zelda games, but Ridge Racer 3D. So that's just, I don't know, that's just kind of interesting, just how, like, what types of game you like to play. I kind of wish you would. That also kind of makes me even more wish you had kind of given more information about which Nintendo systems you hadn't played. Because these are clearly very, very different games in the norm that people generally play on these systems. I kind of would have liked to know what you, if anything, you played on the SNES or NES or anything before GameCube, really. The Wii and Wii U, I've never really played anything that avidly on them to note. Which is interesting because the Wii and Wii U, even though the Wii U, of course, it was a relative failure, especially by Nintendo standards, there were still a bunch of amazing games in that system. Super Mario 3D World, Pikmin 3, Smash Bros, Wonderful 101, etc. And on the Wii, Mario Galaxy, you got 2 Zelda games, Metroid Trilogy. So there are a lot of games there. It's just interesting that you say you didn't really play anything all that much in those systems. So that's just, I do appreciate some of the information you're giving here. For some reason, I've always felt compelled to buy Nintendo consoles, but never had much impetus to play games on them apart from exclusives. And it's that line right there. I've always felt compelled to buy Nintendo consoles. That right there, and then you kind of as phrasing it like, I'm not sure why I'm buying these, but I feel like I should buy them anyway, kind of makes me feel that you were never really going to love the Nintendo Switch in the first place, especially since you didn't really love the Wii or the Wii U. So, just that kind of questioning you have here, I'm also really curious as to why you're buying these systems if all you play on them is these relatively niche exclusives. I've never liked their operating systems, and in the case of GameCube, the Wii and Wii U, I didn't like their controllers either. Which each of their own, but considering the GameCube and the Wii U Pro controller are considered some of the most comfortable controllers of all time. The Wii, yes, I personally didn't really like using the Wiimote either, but you can still use the GameCube controller on that system, which granted you didn't like the GameCube controller anyway, which I still kind of find a bit baffling, but like I said, each of their own, I understand, but just I personally have never found anyone who hasn't loved the GameCube controller. Maybe it's just the way the buttons were laid out. Maybe it was I don't know. I don't know. With a Nintendo Switch, though, everything seemed different. A new leaf. Upon the launch of the Switch, it felt like Nintendo had turned a new leaf. It felt like they were a major contender again with after the disappointing Wii U. The Switch isn't the most powerful console out there, but it has enough grunt packed into its small form factor to impress. And with its launch lineup, it truly did. That's actually kind of interesting because a lot of people were criticizing the Switch for the launch titles it had. So just there are there's just a bunch of weird opinions here that I'm not really entirely sure how to how to really go about explaining them, whatever, or interpreting them. I like this new Joy-Con and Pro controllers. I haven't really played with the Pro controller yet, but from what I can tell, it's another A plus controller. Might even be more comfortable than the Wii U Pro controller. Its OS doesn't offend me, and I look forward to new releases coming out for it thick and fast. But after a joyous first 6 months or so, I found myself using my Switch less and less. After a fantastic launch, Nintendo had done little else, at least for me, to keep the ball rolling. And again, many people have the exact opposite opinion. They think, oh, Zelda was really the only great game at launch. People seem to forget about Bomberman and Fast RMX and Shovel Knight, but whatever. Many people are like, oh, there weren't that many big AAA or even first party games outside of Zelda. And then after Mario Kart, Splatoon, Arms, Xenoblade, Pokemon, like there just all these games came out at least once a month after that, Mario Odyssey, etc. That people are like, yes, 2017 is one of the greatest years for Nintendo, period. Yeah, you have the exact opposite opinion where you actually liked the launch titles. Again, I kind of wish you would explain which launch titles you really got into. If it was just Zelda, which I personally feel is enough to real, especially for just how good Zelda Breath of the Wild was, I kind of feel that was enough to hold people over until Mario Kart, etc. came out. But I kind of would have liked to know what games you played at launch. And then you say nothing else after that, not Splatoon or Armed or Pokemon or Mario Odyssey, which we'll actually get into later. None of that held your interest after a launch, which, like I said, is very interesting opinion here. Games like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Bayonetta 2, and Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze are great if you've not played them before, but if you have, paying $50 to play them again is a hard pill to swallow, and it's actually $60. I I don't know where you got that number from, but it's actually 60, which could have actually made your argument a little stronger. But regardless, my thoughts on ports like this is that, especially with Donkey Kong and Bayonetta, which both of those games barely sold 1 million on the Wii U, Nintendo literally has no reason not to try to get these games to sell more. Bayonetta 2 and Tropical Freeze have both outsold their Wii U counterpart in the same time frame. And Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is still charting in the top 10 NPD in I think it charted in the March MPD of 2018, almost a year after it came out. Meaning that even though it's a game, it was the highest selling game on Wii U, people are still buying it for Switch. And Bayonetta 2 and Tropical Freeze, Nintendo and the second and third party companies that help make those games, they either lost money or barely broke even on those games. So it makes perfect sense for them to at least try to get a little more out of those games. Porting them probably didn't take much effort at all. So selling just a couple thousand units would have been more than enough for them to feel justified in doing that, and clearly these games are selling better than the Wii U counterparts. Do I feel they should have been sold for 60? Maybe not Tropical Freeze, especially since it was sold for 50 at the time. But since Bayonetta 2 was also bundled with Bayonetta 1, it's still two amazing games for the price of one, basically. So having it at 60, I'm not exactly mad at that. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it has extra characters and the battle mode, so sure, sell that for 60. But Tropical Freeze, I do agree, should have been 50, maybe even 40 or less. But as of right now, Nintendo doesn't really have a reason not to continue to try to port these games over, especially since no one actually bought them on the Wii U. It's really weird how people only see the Wii U as relevant if it helps bash the Switch. Whereas for the past 4 years, the Wii U wasn't relevant at all. But now that Tropical Freeze came out for $60, people are like, oh, why would people buy it on the Switch when they already could have gotten it on Wii U when no one had a Wii U to buy Tropical Freeze in the first place? So I'll continue. And then there are new exclusives like Mario Odyssey and Labo. The former, to me, is highly disappointing, while the latter is certainly an interesting experiment, but I'm not sure if it has legs. I would really, really like to know why or even how you found Mario Odyssey disappointing. It's one thing to say a game is uninteresting. Maybe you just don't like platformers. Maybe, I don't know, the control scheme just wasn't up your alley. Maybe you just generally don't like Mario games. And that's fine. But saying that it was highly disappointing, what about it was disappointing? I felt it was the most gorgeous Mario game ever. It handled the best. It had the, I personally feel it had the best worlds to explore, the best environments. Just the capture mechanic was new and innovative. So I don't really understand what about it could be disappointing. Um, so with you not going further and explaining yourself, I'm just not sure exactly what about it you didn't like, and I'm actually really interested and want to know that. And Labo, I I don't really understand why you say you're not sure if it has legs, because even in the Labo reveal trailer, there were devices in that trailer that weren't in the initial Labo Toy-Con Box 1, meaning that Nintendo is surely going to be releasing Toy-Con Box 3, 4, etc., in a couple months or years down the line. So as long as Nintendo keeps releasing new lab sets, it's going to keep selling. Um, so it's one of the Labo is kind of one of those things where it can just kind of keep going. So as long as Nintendo keeps supporting it, I feel it has as much legs as Nintendo wants to give it. Nintendo has a handful of exclusives on the Switch, but there's simply not enough to keep me glued to its screen. And look, I get it. It's your opinion that these games just aren't for you, and that's fine. I just have a problem with you saying you were disappointed in Mario Odyssey and then not giving any more information outside of that. And especially since you said you didn't really play much on Wii U, I don't have a reason to believe that you don't want to pick up Tropical Freeze, Bayonetta 2, or Mario Kart, especially since you said Donkey Konga was the game you played most on GameCube. So wouldn't you jump at the chance to play a brand new Donkey Kong game? So just a lot of this information so far has just been a bit confusing. So I'll continue. 99 problems and my Switch is one. Third party support is a problem. though perhaps not as much as usual for a Nintendo console. Plenty of third parties are releasing their games on Switch, but they tend to be old games, games they can get running in the shortest amount of time possible and sell once again on a new platform. To truly succeed, the Nintendo Switch needs third parties to go the extra mile. Bethesda has done a great job bringing titles like Doom and Skyrim to the hardware, demonstrating it can handle such titles with some compromises. But other third parties have been re- reticent to make the effort. And with talk of Sony and Microsoft planning their next gen consoles down the rounds, yeah, it's a problem that is only set to get worse. And this is just an issue with third party in general when it comes to Nintendo. Like, for some dumb reason, when it comes to Nintendo, third parties just don't want to try. Even though the 3DS was super successful, third parties just kind of never jumped on it. The Switch, even though it's super successful, third parties consistently don't want to bring games for it or keep saying we have no plans for games in the future, EA. Like, I get it. The Switch and 3DS and Wii U hardware, they were less powerful than their competitions. I understand this. This just means that third parties should put a bit more effort into putting their games on the system like Bethesda has with Doom and Skyrim. So many people looked at Doom and thought, "Oh, Doom, Wolfenstein, Skyrim, they can't possibly get these games on the Switch." Like when Skyrim was first shown off at that initial Switch reveal trailer thing, everyone was saying, "Oh, Skyrim's not actually coming. That's just a demo thing, and it couldn't even run on the Switch anyway," which is ridiculous. I think there's a phone port of Skyrim, so could be wrong about that, but I think that to be true. I don't know. Um, Bethesda would literally put Skyrim on anything with a screen if possible. And considering it clearly is possible to put it on Switch, they were always going to put Skyrim on the Switch. Same thing with Doom. People looked at Doom and were like, "Oh, Nintendo couldn't possibly Bethesda couldn't possibly get that on Switch," but they did. It's only 30 frames per second, but it's still on the Switch running pretty stably. And I just kind of wish other third parties would put the effort into this. And if the Switch continues to sell, if it does sell that 20 million units this year like Nintendo wants, I have high hopes that third parties might actually at least try a little bit with games going forwards. So we'll hope that's true. I've also found myself irritated by my Nintendo Switch console itself in the last few months. Often, it just seemingly refuses to charge when the battery is completely dead. Like, Pro Controller will just randomly decide to disconnect from time to time. After being unable to back up my saves has always played off the back of my mind. Yeah. It's great that Nintendo has finally found the wisdom to have games tied to an account rather than a console, but they're still behind in the times with other features that we're now accustomed to as standard, like voice chat, for instance. Most of the stuff he said here is true, and Nintendo has recently come out and said they're bringing cloud saves with the new online service. Although voice chat is not included in that, you still have to do that stupid phone app, which I don't understand. I hope they fix that. Um, but the stuff with the Pro controller and it not charging, I kind of feel that might just be your Switch, especially since you said you got it at launch, or at least near launch. It's not uncommon for even Nintendo consoles in general, but even Nintendo consoles. It tends to be less rare with Nintendo consoles, but still, it's not uncommon for early adopters of systems to have their systems not exactly hold up over time. Even like shortly after launch, they start kind of wearing down a little bit. Like all the problems with the Joy-Con controllers, those have been that's been fixed already, but early adopters clearly saw problems. But it hasn't really a problem since the first couple of months. And a lot of the early adopted PS4 and Xbox Ones, they kind of literally blew up very shortly after launch. And a lot of Nintendo Switch systems were like bending and overheating. So that's just kind of an issue with early adopters. And I kind of feel that might just be the problem with your Switch. Might just be it has a bad battery or something. So you could probably get that exchanged. So, but all the stuff with the backup saves and voice chat, that is a legitimate concern. Nintendo finally online. And then there's today's news. Nintendo's online service for the Switch will launch in September. It should be something to be excited about, probably, but instead it makes me roll my eyes. For $19.99, which admittedly isn't much, I'll be able to play games like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe online, which I've already been doing for free for the past year. I'll also be able to back up the save data of some games to the cloud. I don't remember it saying some games. Maybe I just missed that part. Maybe it was just first party games. I'm not really sure exactly what he's insinuating here. Nintendo also promises special offers for subscribers, and finally, a library of NES games updated with online features. I do kind of wish they go beyond NES games and actually do like a what some people are describing as a Netflix style um, game exclusive service, where like every couple of weeks they add NES, SNES, GameCube, and 64, and so on. You can just kind of have this giant library of games as long as you pay for the service, or even have a separate service on top of that, and just have the NES games for the $20 service. Maybe have an extra $5, $10 to have the entire thing. Again, 1999 is cheap considering Sony and Microsoft's online offerings, but at this time it's hard to be convinced that Nintendo's online service is value for money. It feels a bit forced and unnecessary, and to rub salt in the wound, Nintendo has also said that it has no plans to bring its much loved Virtual Console to the Switch. Why, Nintendo? Just why? And this right here is honestly the reason why I picked this article in the first place. Because Nintendo said they have no plans right now to bring Virtual Console as we know it to the Switch. People people just took that, read all the articles at face value, and just ran with it. They're like, "Oh, Nintendo is not bringing Virtual Console to the Switch. Why?" Like they've already said they're bringing a library of NES games with online features. Clearly, they have plans to bring older games to the Switch in some form. They might just not call it Virtual Console. They might just integrate it into the the online store as it is already, or they might have a completely separate app with a completely different name. Or maybe, like I said, maybe it will be that Netflix style game subscription service just with a different name. They don't want to say the Virtual Console is coming, but you have to pay for it. That I feel like people might honestly get more upset at that than if no Virtual Console at all. So I feel there is a reason for this. And then he goes on to talk about the Virtual Console as a whole. Virtual insanity. Virtual Console on Switch was something many gamers, including myself, saw the shoe in. Something that definitely would happen. It perhaps still could, but maybe with a new name. Or, given Nintendo's success with the SNES and NES mini consoles, it could be something that they're no longer interested in pursuing. Why go through the trouble of publishing retro games on the Switch when they can just pump out a new piece of hardware with many games on it and sell more units? In any case, is a blow to those who are hoping that they could someday have a library of great retro games on the Switch. Um, the main problem with this argument is that the NES and SNES only have, I think, 30 and 21 games on them respectively. So they don't have the entire NES and SNES library on there. They would have to release a completely different NES or SNES mini console in order to put new games on there. So I feel, and even if they did actually end up putting NES and SNES games on the Switch, people who bought the NES and SNES mini systems, I almost guarantee a significant portion of them would quadruple dip at this point, even though they already have these games on an actual system. You can't take that little system with you anywhere you want. You can't play it in the car or on a bus or anything. So having these games on the Switch themselves would be a very different experience than playing them on the NES Classic. Also, the main reason why I feel Nintendo hasn't released a virtual console in any form yet is because indie games are booming on the system. And like many people have said all over YouTube and whatnot, any any indie games and virtual console games I don't really feel could coexist unless they were in two completely separate apps. Maybe, but if they were all just in the eShop in one convenient location, many people might just buy A Link to the Past for a fourth time as opposed to buying Celeste or something like that. Now, there's a pretty high chances that many people might buy both, but if one, I think Celeste at $20, if they release, if they did go straight a virtual console route and have Link to the Past be on there for, let's say, I don't know, $7. That's $7 for a game you already know you're gonna love, as opposed to Celeste, which looks really good but still is $20. There's surely gonna be some people who would buy Celeste, but just having the Link to the Past available might skew some people away from great indie games like Celeste. So they didn't want to have any kind of competition with these types of games that are thriving on their system. So it in that aspect it kind of makes sense why they wouldn't have it yet. And if they did have this Netflix style subscription service like people are saying, then that wouldn't even be an issue because you wouldn't really have to pay for it since it's already either a monthly fee or it's already included in the $20 you're paying for online anyway. I suppose it's important to consider that the Switch is still little more than a year old, and that so much can change in another year. Who knows? In a year's time, the Switch might have some form of virtual console, and third parties might have started to make exclusive games for it, but it doesn't seem likely. Okay, whatever. After a strong start, the same old cracks are starting to show. Nintendo's inability to meaningfully acquire third party support, inexperience with online services, and a deficit of system features. A year ago, I thought Nintendo had changed, and it has, but it still has some way to go to totally win me over. And again, these are all great points per se, but considering just how many people are buying the Switch, considering just how successful the Switch has been so far, just how much games like Mario Odyssey, which you deem disappointing, and the other Wii U ports are doing, I'm just not really sure if Nintendo would even consider catering anything they do to your needs. Especially since, like I said before, I honestly feel you weren't really in a position where you were ever really going to like the Switch in any meaningful way in the first place. Because you said you hadn't really played the Wii or Wii U all that much, yet you still complained about Wii U ports. You you claimed Mario Odyssey was disappointing, yet you didn't really give any explanations why. You said you always just kind of buy Nintendo consoles seemingly out of obligation without really knowing why you bought them in the first place. And you say you only ever really buy exclusives for the systems, yet you seem to not really even want to try any Switch exclusives. So I'm just not really sure exactly you are the audience Nintendo necessarily wants to try to market this for. So I appreciate your take on most of the stuff. I very much so appreciated the uniqueness of the first couple of paragraphs where you're saying the types of games you do play, which are very different than other people play on those systems. And it's a very interesting point to say that you weren't super into Mario Odyssey. I just kind of wish you would elaborate more as to why you didn't find that game interesting. So yeah, I guess basically what I'm trying to say is Nintendo Could they be doing stuff better? Yes. Their online service is not perfect, but it's only $20. So I'm not really sure if we should have expected so much out of it as people were expecting. Would voice chat be nice? Yes. I really hope they do get rid of that stupid mobile app. But they are bringing cloud backups. They are bringing NES games with online features. They very easily could bring more virtual console type experiences down the line, just not in that form. People just kind of jumped the gun with that, and same thing here. He kind of jumped the gun with that and just assumed Nintendo wouldn't have virtual console or classic games in any aspect on the Switch, even though that would be a gold mine for them. I just don't really think they. I don't think Nintendo would even consider not having that in any form. So yeah, what do you think about all this? Are you disappointed in the Switch at all? Do you think there's anything they could be doing better? Uh, do you are you excited or are you disappointed in the actual online service that they're presenting? If if there was a virtual console or like a Netflix style virtual console that they released, would you be okay with paying an extra $5 or even $10 for that? Leave thoughts down below. Let's have a discussion going, and I will see you later.